Hi, this is Ken McCarthy, and welcome to the occasional Jazz on the Tube podcast. Today we're here with a very special guest talking about a beautiful book. I want to tell you about it right away. It's called Imperfect Harmony. And we're going to talk about singing. And in the jazz world today, singing is kind of seen as one singer with a trio, and that's all good. But there's deeper roots to American singing. And one of the things that Stacy Horn, our guest, goes into in her book is about some of the wonderful singing initiatives, group singing initiatives that were part of American society in the last century. Well, actually, the last century, the 19th century. And to put this in jazz context, I got started on this thinking when I read Vic Hobson's book about Louis Armstrong. And he makes the point emphatically a million different ways that Louis Armstrong considered himself a singer first and just happened to play the trumpet. Now, all our jazz fans know that that's unbelievable to hear that because he was so central. His trumpet playing was formative to the whole art. You can't have jazz without Louis Armstrong. It's impossible. And that he thought of himself as a singer first is kind of amazing. And then I learned that even though he was very poor and didn't get a chance really to go to high school, he did get educated in the public schools, and every day there was singing in class. I even went out and got the book. I don't know if I have it handy. And every single day, and he learned some basic solfege. I think that's how do you say it? Solfege. And I just found that amazing. And it turns out that a lot of the great jazz innovators, like people like Jelly Roll Morton, Earl Hines, Sidney Bechet, people that are absolutely central to the music, all got their start singing in boy groups. And one traveler to the United States in the 19th century said, you couldn't go anywhere without four kids singing on a street corner. It was that common, especially among the Black community. It was a hugely important part of cultural life, right? So I looked into solfege a little bit, and I learned that it was taught, which is basically sight singing, was taught in New Orleans, was taught in Cuba, and it was taught in Puerto Rico. And there was a great trumpet player, Lionel Fairbos, who was still playing at the age of 100. And I got a chance to talk with him, and he talked about the fact he wasn't allowed to pick up an instrument until he mastered sight singing. And I met another guy in Cuba who is 90. He's passed away too, sadly. Gilberto Valdez, and he said the same thing. He wasn't allowed to play an instrument until he mastered sight singing, and he hated it. By the way, he really wanted to play an instrument. And then when James Reese Europe, which that was his name, was a military man who brought the first American popular music to France and Europe during World War I. And he had to recruit an army band to do that. And he couldn't find enough great sight readers. So he had to actually go to Puerto Rico, where I think he picked up half his band in Puerto Rico, where they had a traditional solfege. So the point I want to make is that when we go at the very roots of jazz, we've got a whole lot of singing going on. It's not just one singer with a trio. It was woven into the fabric and the foundation of the art. And I have seen often, and we've all seen this, fundraisers for groups to get raise money for instruments for kids, and that's a very important thing to do. But I have to say, in the meantime, if there's a good music teacher, the kids could be singing, and they could be learning about harmony, and they could be learning about soloing and chord progressions and all kinds of things before they ever get an instrument in their hands. And singing is not free because you need someone to lead the singing, and that person needs to be paid. But we should be having a whole lot more going on. So anyway, this is a long introduction to Stacy's book, which is called Imperfect Harmony, and it's about, so Stacy, it's about your experience as a singer, which maybe you could tell us about. You're a writer primarily, obviously, a wonderful writer. How did you find yourself joining a choir? Which choir did you join, and what impact did it have on your life?
That's actually what that book is about. Like everything, every chapter, every fact goes back to like why I wrote this book and how I came to singing. And I wrote the book because I knew about this great thing that pretty much anyone can do that was like a surefire way to feeling better. And it's something that everyone has access to, costs almost nothing to do. But how I got into it, I was in my 20s and I was just going through this terrible rock bottom period of life. And I was doing everything I could to feel better, and everything I thought of to do just made everything worse. Things like drinking, I was just sinking. And at one point, and I will never forget this, I was sitting on my living room floor in my apartment in New York City, with my arms around my leg, just rocking back and forth, crying, and just, I was like, what can I do? I'm going to kill myself if I keep going in the direction that I'm going. And so I tried to think of things that in my life that have made me feel better. And things that were easily, accessible, quit drinking. Yes, I know I have to do that, but what's something immediate that I can do? And I remembered, one point in high school where I was dating a guy that sang with, his church choir. And I'm not religious. I don't go to church. But he said, come join us to sing for Christmas. And I thought, oh, well, singing Christmas carols, that sounds fun. And it was glorious. It didn't matter that I was singing in a church. It didn't matter what I believed. I just had the time of my life doing that. So when I was sitting on the floor, rocking back and forth, I went, oh, singing in a choir. Well, I can do that. And so within a week, I was walking around Manhattan looking for a church to sing in, something. I wanted a church that was close by. And I walked into Grace Church, which is at 10th Street and Broadway. And Grace Church is beautiful. It was designed by James Renwick, who's the same architect who designed St. Patrick's, a more well-known church. And so I walked in and I said, do you have a choir? And they said, yes. And I said, how can I join? And it turned out the choir director was there. And so I went and talked to him. And I said, can I join your choir? And he goes, sure, but you have to audition. And I just looked at him and I had one instance of auditioning, and that was also in high school. I auditioned to be in a school play for Bye Bye Birdie. And at my audition, I got so nervous that everything that came out of my mouth was terrible. It was out of tune, even though I was perfectly capable of singing in tune. And I could hear that I was singing out of tune, and I couldn't fix it. And so I just skulked out, and of course I didn't get in. So when he said I had to audition, I just looked at him and I said, look, I'll audition, but it's going to be terrible. You just have to take my word for it. I don't have a great voice. I'm not promising that, but I can sing in tune. And he said, okay, but you got to audition. So I did. And for whatever reason, I was just fine. I didn't have, well, in fact, he said to me, he said, well, it's true. You don't have a great voice. And he goes, but you can sing in tune. Welcome to the choir. So I showed up at the very first rehearsal, and they were singing Handel's Messiah. And I was not, and still I am not, a sight singer. And everyone, it's, the score. It's like this big fat thing. And everyone opened it up, looked down, and just started singing. And I'm looking down I don't know these pieces. How am I supposed to? I was just so flummoxed. And for whatever reason, I just hung in there. And I quickly learned just how, Handel's Messiah was much more complicated than the Christmas carols that I had sung back in high school. But as a result, 1,000 times more satisfying and
Hmm.
glorious to sing. And it it did exactly what I had hoped it would do. Like, and I say this again and again to anyone who will listen. It's not like it's going to make terrible things go away, but however bad you feel, you may not go to feeling great again, but you're going to go to feeling better than when you started. It just never fails.
Mm. It's really an important lesson, and most communities, if you look around, probably have some kind of choirs or choruses or singing groups that you can join. And your criteria was within a close walk of your apartment, right? Um, so the story you tell the story in the book about all your experiences going through this as a singer, and you interweave in the book really interesting stories about community choirs of the past. And if I remember correctly, and by the way, the book, I have to say, starts out with this really beautiful quote from Brian Eno. He says, "I believe in singing, and I believe in singing together." Um,
That's the whole thing. That's the key. Like, singing in the shower is fun. Singing in your car alone is fun, but it does not compare to singing in harmony with others. Like, it gives this, like, well, it's like a physical thrill when you're like thrumming in harmony, when you get it just right. There's just no comparison.
and this is why I believe it was such a, remember, pre-television, pre-internet, pre-television, pre-radio, pre-records, really. What else, how else were you going to get music unless you made it? So what could be more fun for kids than, and the phrase that they used back in New Orleans was, they called it cracking up a chord. In other words, they would, because they were making these arrangements themselves. They didn't have a score. And one guy would sing, and then another guy would sing, and then another, and you'd sort of like play with it until you could get this incredible resonance. What could be more fun? Honestly, I mean, and then to put tunes together, and it's funny, we don't realize that groups like the Beatles and the Beach Boys were basically guys that were really into singing in harmony. Like that's what it was all about. They talk about rock and roll, and sure, that was a big part of it, but you can't pull that out of their music and have their music left, you know?
They were also incredibly inventive. Like, as I learned more about harmony, and I could pick out and hear more of what they were doing, and it's amazing.
And so one of the things that I hope that our conversation does is trigger interest in people that are in music education to do everything they can to, even if we can't get instruments in the schools tomorrow, we can at least start singing more. I mean, there's just no singing going on. We had a lady when I was in grammar school that came in. She was the mother of one of the children, and she came in once every blue moon to take us through tunes. I still remember it, like, joyfully. And maybe it was fifth grade. I don't even know if it certainly wasn't my whole time in grammar school. High school, no singing at all, nothing, zip. And this is something that we could bring to kids and do with kids. And I think it would be a really good thing. So you talk about some really
Can I
wonderful,
just can
yeah.
I just interrupt, because you just made me realize something. One of the things I write about in the book, I had always my part that I sang was soprano one, the highest part that usually has the melody. And at a certain point, I was downgraded, and that's how it felt to me at the
Oh,
time, to soprano two, and it was very upsetting.
mm,
I felt like I'd been demoted, and and I had no warning. Like, we learned when they handed out the music in September, and so a rehearsal started, and all of a sudden I had to follow a different part, and it was a nightmare because I looked down and I kept trying to find that note, because it's easy to find the melody, so it
right.
was floating on top, and I just I couldn't do it. I just kept finding some horribly wrong note that, was throwing off everyone around me. But eventually I got it. And when I got it, I don't know why. So maybe a music theory person can answer this. But once I got it right, I felt harmony more than when I felt it when I was singing as soprano one. It just,
Interesting.
I felt I'm singing in harmony, which I just never got. And and it's so much better. Like when I first got demoted,
Yeah.
my director said, it's not because you can't sing soprano one, but we need soprano twos, and it was arbitrary who I moved. He says, if you can get someone to switch with, a soprano one to switch with you, you can. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna find anyone in the world that would switch with me. But once I got that feeling of harmony that I got from singing a soprano two, I would never switch. Like you couldn't pay me to go back to soprano one. It's that much better. But the reason I brought this story up is I learned more about harmony by singing soprano two, and I learned it by doing it. It was like nothing that the
Right.
director or anyone else taught me. Like one thing I always envied that some singers could do is that somebody could be singing along and they could just come in and harmonize. Like they could find notes that would harmonize. And I could never do that. And now I can. I'm not great at it, but
Mhm.
I can find other notes out of thin air and create harmony, which it's a wonderful feeling.
And this is what Hobson in his book about Armstrong suggests, and it makes perfect sense that the theory, there was no school for jazz in 1900, right? It didn't exist. And so all the theory that makes jazz work was worked out on street corners by basically boys. I mean, 12, 13, 14-year-old guys hanging out, cracking up chords.
Yeah. And it's figure outable. You don't have to
Right.
necessarily be taught.
Right. And then Armstrong did eventually learn to read music a little bit later as a young man. He had a gig where music was, reading was required. So he learned that part of it. But previous to that, it was all creating it. You don't have to go to school to learn how to put paint on a canvas,
Yeah.
right? And you can see the color, if you like it or you don't like it,
Yeah.
and you can back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and all that theoretical stuff, which is how a lot of people learn jazz now. It starts with theory. That all that theoretical stuff can come later.
Yeah.
So I want to go through, and we're to be fair to Stacy, and I know this from my own experience. You write a book, and you would think that the writer of a book would remember everything in the book they wrote. I can tell you personally from firsthand experience, it doesn't work that way. I have to open my own books to figure out what the heck I said years ago.
Yeah.
So if we stump you, Stacy, please forgive us. We're not trying to. But weaving through your personal experience, which I think is really you've conveyed a lot of that already, and it kind of boils down to this: is it's music has. I mean, this is almost ridiculous to say. It's so obvious, but music has a physical feeling component, and harmony is a feeling, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you named your book Imperfect Harmony, right? Harmony is a feeling. It's not a theory. It's not a musical theory. It's not a doing it right, following the instructions thing. It's actually a thing that exists. So you talked about some great kind of community singing initiatives that were fostered in the 19th century. I think most of them were. Again, we'll just take a stab at these and see how it goes. The Orpheus Glee Club. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are the coal miners.
Okay, tell me about them.
Well, it shouldn't surprise anyone, but the Orpheus Glee Club was a group of coal miners. There had been a terrible mining disaster, and I forget how many miners were killed, but a large number of miners were killed. And the survivors, one of the first things they did within a day or so of this happening is they got together in a church and started singing and formed this group, the Orpheus Glee Club. And I told this story I included this story just as an example of one of many examples of people singing because it made them feel better, singing in tragedy, singing, in times of great loss. Like after 9/11, I was a volunteer down at the site at St. Paul's
St.
Chapel, and
Paul's,
that's
yeah.
where rescue workers would come in to get coffee, to sleep, to relax, and just talk, and for a shoulder to cry on. And I'll never forget. So it was a very quiet, solemn place for the most part. And one day, this rescue worker, covered head to toe in ash, sits down at the piano and starts playing, I believe it was Great Balls of Fire.
Mm.
And he's wailing away at this, and like everybody froze because it's like this amazing, exciting, joyful, happy piece. And we're going like, is this okay? Is this sacrilegious somehow?
Mm.
And all of a sudden you could see everyone just like relax and then perk up, and like it was more than okay. And from that day forward, we had musicians coming in all the time and playing, and music became a way of healing.
Wow, what a great thing. Um, so let's go to the next one, the Rubenstein or Rubenstein Club. Does that ring a bell?
Is,
I know you wrote the book, but
do you remember writing this? Is that the one, the the women's glee club, or is that the one, the people's choir?
let's see. It starts with Henry Edward Kriebel. Crable, an influential 19th century music critic for the New York Times, once wrote, "A female chorus cannot be a success." Oh my God. And and if you should form one of angels from heaven, with Saint Cecilia as conductress, I would say the same. Oh my God. So
You know what?
you point out that choral societies were spreading all over America. And I think that's one of the things that's just caught my attention. Here we are in 19th century America. We're getting kind of urbanized, I guess. We're on the road to urbanization. Life was hard. And how did people, again, no TV, no movies, no radio. How did people respond? They formed choral groups, choral societies. And now women were not, but for many of them, women were welcome only when they were needed as soloists on the night of the performance. Does that ring a bell?
Oh yeah, I do remember that.
Okay.
But I have to say, Kriebel. Now I forget how to pronounce it, but one of his ancestors sings in the choir I sing with today, and he
Wow.
read that book, and he had papers and belongings of this guy. So it was
Okay.
funny. But yeah, there was this bias against women singers. But yeah, I remember that. I forget what I wrote about it, but
So it's a young group. So in 1886, a young group of women had gone to see their former music teacher, William Roger Chapman, conduct the all-male choral society that he recently formed. After the concert, the girls surrounded him and begged him to let them continue to sing with him as well.
yeah, and he formed this group for women only.
And it's hard to believe that that had to be done.
Well, that belief, that feeling persists to this day. I mean, I don't know that, like a lot of the choral societies in New York, at least, were formed by Irish and German immigrants
Mm.
because these choral societies and choral groups were already big in Germany
Ah,
and
okay.
England and Ireland, and there was this feeling that came from those groups that choir boys, good thing, choir girls, no thank you.
Interesting. Interesting. I guess, well, things were more segregated then, right? You'd go to the pub or whatever and,
But yeah, but introducing girls to choirs, children's choirs, and at least in religious setting, is still a new thing.
wow. 2025. Hard to believe we're in that era. Now the next one, the People's Choral Union. This is sort of
Yeah.
like almost like can I stump Stacy? The People's Choral Union. So 1892 was a tough year for working class in New York. That's how it starts.
Yeah, I do remember him just because they sang um, at Carnegie Hall. So every time I sing at Carnegie Hall, which is not a lot, I have this picture in my head of the People's Choral Union. There were so many members that they flooded the stage. They flooded the whole area where the orchestra now plays to sing. And I remember him, and he was such a good guy, the guy that ran that choir. There was like in New York at the time, there were plenty of opportunities to participate in music if you were a wealthy New Yorker, but there were fewer opportunities for the working class of New
Mm.
York. And when he formed the People's Choral Union, I mean, it just like, it was immense. Like, I forget how many singers it was, but some very large number of singers who very, seriously and dedicatedly would come to the rehearsals and learn these pieces and perform them. And it that I found quotes from people who sang in the choir, and it was a very meaningful and important part of their lives.
Does it still exist?
No.
No.
Now
But what an
there are more opportunities.
oh, that's good.
Yeah.
But that's another thing hard to believe that but again, things were so segregated, rich, poor. I mean, there was a huge gap between the people struggling to stay alive and the well-to-do.
The thing was, when I was researching this book, looking for examples, it was very easy to find them. They're endless. It's like singing is great. It's not hard to find proof. Um, but there was one instance where I found a terrible story, but it wasn't related to singing. But ironically, there was a riot in a church in downtown New York called the Chatham Street Chapel, and it was a riot that choristers participated in. What happened was, I don't know if you want me to tell this story.
Yeah, tell it. Why not? I mean, as long as it's not too grim.
Well, slavery was outlawed in New York in 1827, I believe. And so people of color would celebrate July 4th every year as their own Independence Day. And so a choir of Black families, Black people, had arranged to have a celebration and a choir performance in a church in Chatham Street. And so they did it on a day other than July 4th because they were afraid of attracting anti-abolitionists to their performance. And they, of course, they asked in advance, can we use your church to have this celebration? And it was the same night that the choir rehearsed. So they approached the choir director and said, is it okay? And he said, oh, sure, no problem. It's July. Most people don't show up. It's the summer. They don't show up anyway. We'll rehearse in another part of the church. So they came and they started their performance, and word had gotten out about it. So anti-abolitionists descended on the church,
Wow.
intending to start a riot. At the same time, the choir showed up for rehearsal, and for whatever reason, the rioters were able to convince the choristers to join them and attack this congregation.
Oh my God.
And so it was a big thing at the time, and so there were articles in all the New York papers about it, and the articles exactly reflected the paper's political leanings. If it was left-leaning, the Black congregation were the victims. If it was right-leaning, the white choristers and anti-abolitionists were the victims. And the only people arrested in that whole mess were 4 young Black men, the victims essentially, who weren't named in any of the articles. And so I thought, oh God, it'd be so great if I could track down who these guys were and just write something about what happened to them, some addendum to the story. So I went down to the municipal archives, looked through the police court records, and I found them.
Wow.
I know, it's amazing. It was so exciting. One guy, it was illegible. 2 of them had names that were like Paul Smith. There's no way. Yeah. But one guy had a very unusual name. Of course, my mind is blanking now. Yeah. But I was able to research him, and amazingly, he was so incensed that about the injustice of what had happened and the fact that he was arrested when he was a victim, that he was a former slave. He educated himself and then spent the rest of his life going around the country lecturing against slavery and segregation, sometimes lecturing with Frederick Douglass.
Wow.
And towards the end of his life, he wrote an autobiography. And to this day, I don't know who did it. I could probably go back and find out now. But some great kind soul scanned every page of this autobiography and uploaded it to the internet, where I found it, downloaded, and hoped against hope that he would mention the Chatham Street riot, and he did. So I was able to include a perspective on that riot from someone who had been a victim of it.
Who's actually there. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to read. I mean, it's a dark chapter in our history. Attempts were made to drag the speaker, Benjamin F. Hughes, the principal of the African Free School number 3, from the stage. This was ugly. Blows were struck. A collection box was. This has happened in a church.
Yeah.
Talk about thuggery. They threw benches.
They broke furniture, yeah.
Lamps were smashed. Obviously, it wasn't the guys that came to sing.
Yeah.
It was the people that came to cause a problem. Ward.
Exactly.
Does this ring a bell? Was his name Ward?
Oh, yes.
Let's see. What's his first name? The four men. I can't find his first name, but his last name was Ward, and so he has an autobiography.
Now I'm thinking Samuel Ringgold Ward, which I might be remembering wrong.
Okay, fascinating. Wow. All right, let's try another one. Francis Boot.
Oh yeah. That was
Nathaniel Dett, D-E-T-T.
Why did I?
See if I can. All right.
Oh, I remember. I hope I'm not remembering wrong, but my choir sang Rafe Vaughan Williams' piece "Toward the Unknown Region," which is just a stunningly beautiful piece about death. And I talk about this, like sometimes, in my opinion, some of the most beautiful music our great composers have ever written have to do with death. It just brings out beauty like nothing else. So we sang this piece Toward the Unknown Region, which was beautiful. And so I started researching it, and I learned that Harvard gives out an award for choral music every year called the Boot Prize, and Vaughan Williams submitted that, and he lost. I thought, how could he possibly lose? And so I went up to Harvard to research the records on that, and I found them. And it was in the process of researching that I came across Nathaniel Dett, who did win the Boot. Oh God, I wish I had a better memory. Maybe he was the one who won the prize that year. I forget. But he was an African-American composer.
This is Boot. This is Boot.
Yes, but
yeah. I'm going to read something from your book. So William James, right, the great psychologist and the brother of...
No, Dett is the composer, not Boot. Well, Boot is a composer, but he isn't the African-American composer.
Okay. But let's talk about Boot for a second, because it's I got a page on Boot. So William James described him as a shy, sensitive, craving praise, as every normal human being craves it, yet getting little. He had, I think, a certain consciousness of living in the shadow. And so one of his final gestures was to see to it that young composers that came after him were not consigned to the shadow. And then
he was a good man.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So he what do you call that? Endowed the prize at Harvard.
Yes.
And then let's see.
So Nathaniel Dett was an African American who won the prize, which was unusual at the time, and so I researched him and his music, and which I liked very much. And I learned that there's a whole society that follows him and is named for him, and a choir named for him. And when Barack Obama was elected president the first time, this choir, the Nathaniel Dett Choir, sang as he proceeded down whatever that road is towards his inauguration, singing about slavery
Wow. So
and freedom.
I'm going to read from your book. He won the award in 1920, or the prize, for his setting of the, I guess, existing spiritual. So he arranged it, called "Don't Be Weary, Traveler." And
Traveler is what slaves were called when they were on the road to freedom. What was that called? The Underground Railroad.
oh, okay. And Det was an African American, and he won the prize. This is important. He won the prize at a time when most of America was segregated, and black music had long been belittled in minstrel shows.
Yeah.
So tell me, this was like a classical kind of choral piece, or it was?
Yes, and very beautiful. I wish I could remember. I don't remember the name of the one that was won, but I not too long ago I heard a choir perform one of his pieces. I believe it was an Ave Maria. But I just love the idea that, he lived in this time and his music was still being played. The idea that his music about the traveler, again, this is what they were referring to, escaping slaves, when they talked about travelers. And they played it as Barack was being inaugurated as the first black president in the United States.
Beautiful.
Made me cry when I learned that.
Yeah, what a beautiful thing. So the book is In Perfect Harmony, and it's Stacy Horn's memoir of joining and staying in. You still in the choir?
Oh, I'll be singing until I can't.
I love it.
In fact, a friend of mine, we're both sopranos, and we have this pact that we'll tell each other when we can't sing soprano anymore, and we'll move to alto. But now that I love singing soprano too, I figure alto is going to just be more of the same. I have no problem. I'm happy to move to alto. I'd be happy to still sing.
Gotcha. So the book is her memoir of her singing life, a certain part of her singing life, which is ongoing, but it's also interwoven with these beautiful stories of the impulse to sing together and write music for people to sing together and to support that. And so my motivation again for this particular interview is, we have a lot of educators that listen to this program, and are we doing enough with singing? Are we doing enough with it? Or are we everything is theory and instruments now, which nothing wrong with that. But if you look at taking this full circle, if you look at the foundation of the art of jazz, it's pretty clear it came from vocal music, even the harmonies and the harmonic structures. And why can't we bring that into the classroom early? I mean, little kids like to sing too. They don't have to wait till they're in college to take music classes, which is what my situation was. So In Perfect Harmony, Stacy Horn, thank you so much for joining us, and first for writing this wonderful book and recording all these great stories, even if you don't remember them all perfectly.
Well, can I just say, I've written 2 memoirs, and even though
really?
they are, singing, this one is one of them, even though they are technically memoirs, they're really, to me, not memoirs. They're excuses to write something that I want to convince people and interest them. So this book is, I use myself as an example throughout, but as you point out, that I'm telling many other stories. It's really a sales pitch for singing.
Exactly, and that's how I read it. What's the other book?
Waiting for My Cats to Die.
Oh.
And that's a book about death.
Okay.
And it's me trying to confront our mortality by immersing myself in the subject.
Wow. Waiting for My Cats to Die. Okay. Now you have
Which is not to say I wanted them to die.
Right. And then you have a new book that's out relatively recently.
The Killing Fields of East New York. All my books have a morbid element.
Okay. And
even the singing book.
It's not a music book, but what's the the story?
Well, I had written a book about the NYPD's cold case squad at one point.
Oh,
This is a squad that goes back and tries to solve old unsolved homicides.
yep.
And in the process of researching unsolved homicides, I learned that East New York, which is actually in Brooklyn, had the highest number of unsolved homicides. And I never forgot that. So 20 years later, I was researching, so why does East New York have the highest number of unsolved homicides? And I traced it to these financial crimes in the late 60s and early 70s. And it was just like, I had been looking for this story for 20 years. When I wrote my book about the cold case squad, my eyes opened up to the injustices of the criminal justice system. I mean, I knew, like everyone knows, that it's unjust, but I saw exactly in many ways how. And I saw how white-collar financial criminals, they almost never get investigated or arrested or prosecuted. But every time I tried to talk to someone about it, they'd like fall asleep. Like, people just can't get excited about it. And they don't see it as destructive as, for instance, murder, but it actually is. So I always had my eye out for a story that would illustrate that in a way that people would understand and not be able to put down and get enraged about. So it's a book where I trace the rise in street crime and murder and unsolved murder to the rise in financial crimes.
Wow. And what's it called again?
The Killing Fields of East New York. It's actually something that was happening nationwide at the time, these kinds of crimes that I write about. It was actually the very first subprime mortgage scandal, like crisis. We had one in 2007, 2008. This was the very first.
And this was again the 60s and 70s?
Late 60s and early 70s. And that's because it all started as a result of this groundbreaking civil rights legislation that led to making it easier for families of color to buy homes. And financial criminals immediately saw that and saw a way of making money by scamming this legislation.
Oh my goodness.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
Wow.
It could have been like such an important step forward in healing the crimes of racism. Instead, it escalated them.
And at the very same time, I know because I grew up in it, that the Bronx was on fire.
Yep.
And I always tell people, it's not like, was there a fire today? It was how many fires were there today,
That was one of the things I researched.
Well, oh gosh, I'm going to have to get that book. True crime. Does it fall in the true crime category?
True crime, but true financial crime.
True
Except
financial
I talk about both. It's like two threads. It shows the destruction of East New York, and again, happening all across the country, and then the rise in financial crimes.
Gotcha. Well, that's another book to check out by Stacy Horn. And then for those of us that are focused on music primarily, this is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. If you're already encouraging singing somehow, this will fortify you. If you are a music educator and you're wondering what can we do next, I think read this book and be inspired. Stacy, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I had fun talking.